Football finances. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, as a segue into that, I want to talk about employees. You're an employee of a company. I wonder if you appear on the balance sheet of your company. Ben, you worked for Kaplan for many years, didn't you?
I did. I was there for 12 years. I would argue I was their most valuable employee. Great with the students, brilliant client relationships. I added so much value as a manager. I'm being arrogant here, but you take the point. But I did not appear on their balance sheet.
That is perfectly correct, ladies and gentlemen. Staff, employees, are off-balance sheet assets. Now, let's think about what an asset is and why is it that staff are not shown on the balance sheet. Assets are something, well, is it something that we own or is it something that we control? Control, exactly. Yeah. So, as an individual employee, you resigned.
Yeah, I decided to leave and I left. They couldn't control me in that regard.
But you can control a chair. You can control plant and machinery. As a business, they can be scrapped, they can be thrown away. And a chair can never go sick. So it's a different relationship. So employees, normal employees, are not controlled. The other factor is, of course, your wages, Ben. Your wages would have been expensed. There's no reliable measure of Ben's brilliance. There's no reliable measure in monetary terms of that asset.
Yeah. So that's our standard employee, but football clubs are quite different.
Right. That's what we're talking about. Football finance.
Yeah.
David Beckham. Do you remember David Beckham?
I do. Actually, David and I have got a lot in common.
Right.
Both grew up in Essex. We both have beautiful wives. We both have a magic right foot. And another thing we had in common, he also wasn't on the balance sheet of Man United.
Now, I can verify all four of those things are true, but maybe not about your magic right foot. But David Beckham was not shown on the balance sheet of Man United. Although, strictly speaking, Man United did control David Beckham to the extent that they held his players' registration. And they were the only ones that David Beckham could play football for. But David Beckham famously came through the ranks at Man United.
Okay, so we haven't got a valuation for him, a reliable number to go, he's worth this amount of money.
Man United never bought David Beckham.
And so without that transaction to prove his value, you can say footballers have a value in general, but not specifically Beckham.
Well, there was one moment, because if you remember, Real Madrid came in and bought David Beckham's players' registration. And they paid something like £24.5 million.
Okay, so at that point, Beckham can be capitalised as an intangible asset in the financial statements of Real Madrid.
Yes, because Real Madrid have credited cash, paid money out, and debited the intangible asset of David Beckham's players' registration.
Okay. And on the other side, Man United, well, they'd just be making a profit on disposal, wouldn't they?
They would. So the sale proceeds come in of £24.5 million.
Yeah.
Zero cost, zero net book value.
Yeah.
Straight on the bottom line.
So debit, cash, credit.
Credit P&L in effect.
Okay.
Man United, remember, profit-making business. Yeah. Is it a football club? Is it a business? You can see how attractive, from an accounting point of view, is to sell something which has got a zero cost, a zero carrying value.
Yeah, and a huge actual value in the marketplace.
Sure.
Okay, we've talked a bit about accounting. Let's talk about a little bit of kind of auditing side now.
Okay.
Let's talk about player wages. So while Beckham was at Man United, this guy would have been earning fortunes. So, his standard wages, he'd have had all sorts of performance bonuses for, minutes he plays, goals he scores, all of this kind of stuff as well.
When I was at Kaplan, I was just paid a basic wage. And I think the auditors of Kaplan probably had a pretty easy job of auditing the wage bill of Kaplan. Wouldn't you say so, Ben?
Yeah, definitely. So, when I used to work in audit, mostly pretty standard businesses, retail organisations, with payroll, you would look at the average salary from last year, add a pay rise, whatever the standard pay rise was, 2%, 5% or whatever, and then multiply it by the average number of employees to get to an expectation of the payroll expense. and then you compare that to actual payroll expense and investigate any differences. What I'm describing here is a substantive analytical procedure. And that would most of the time get you very close to the actual number, tick there, and then you'd look at any joiners during the year, make sure they were processed properly on the correct dates, any leavers during the year, and again make sure they were processed properly, and that would be it for payroll. Pretty straightforward.
But it's not straightforward for footballers because they all have their individual contracts. A goalkeeper will be paid a bonus, presumably, on clean sheets. A striker gets paid a bonuses on the number of goals they score. So presumably the audit implications of that are, what, more work?
Yeah, well, you'd have to look at each contract individually. So we get each player's contract individually. We look at all of their terms. So they'll have a standard salary, but they'll have all sorts of other things that mean that based on certain criteria, they might earn more money. We'd have to look at each player's, and the other factor to take into account is the materiality of these wages will be huge. Right? So for a standard football club, they'll be spending 40-50% of their revenue on players' wages. Whereas for a standard organisation like Kaplan, where we both worked, nothing like 40 to 50% of revenue being spent on players' wages, on employee wages. So we'd look at each individual contract, get all the individual terms, and then we'd have to look, as the auditor, you'd have to be looking for independent data to verify whether these performance criteria have been met. So number of minutes played, goals scored. We'd be looking at independent data sources to confirm the numbers and then create our own expectation of what that player's salary should be for the year, or wages should be for the year, and then compare that to the actual wages.
That's enough on auditing. Yeah, let's go. And that's probably enough on Man United.
Yeah.
Let's continue to talk about football finances, but talk about Liverpool. Talk about Mo Salah. What do we know about Mo Salah, Ben?
He's a fantastic striker.
Yeah, he is.
He looks amazing with his shirt off.
Like you.
Well, I've got a sweet right foot, but my sweet abs are not as sweet as Mo Salah's. So Mo Salah was bought for, the total price for Mo Salah when Liverpool bought him from Roma was £34.3 million.
And I've seen some different figures around that transaction. So what Liverpool were doing in buying Mo Salah, in buying the player's registration, they were crediting cash, and therefore they were able to debit an intangible asset. Because when a football club buys a player's registration, it does meet the criteria for the recognition of an intangible asset under International Accounting Standard 38. There's a reliable measure. Yeah, they've paid some money, there's a probable economic benefit, and they do control the contract. They do control the player to that extent.
So they can capitalise that asset, and then presumably there's amortization.
Yeah, that's right. Mo Salah's not going to play football forever. And my understanding of it is that he had a 5-year contract. Now, under the Bosman ruling, for those of you who know about these things, the residual value of a player at the end of his contract is nil. So you sign the player, you capitalise the transfer fee that you've paid, Liverpool capitalise that, then they amortise it, straight line, 1/5, 1/5, 1/5, over Mo Salah's contract. And
it's zero at the end, but this Bosman ruling is that at the end of the player's contract, they are able to leave the club as a free agent.
Yeah.
There's Liverpool can't demand a transfer fee if they don't sell him before the end of his contract. Okay, so that's reasonably, from an audit side, that's really straightforward to value, or to audit. We look at the amount of money they paid for Mo Salah, easy, back to the bank statements, and we go to the contract and go, it's a 5-year contract, therefore we're taking the 34.3 million, divide by 5, there's our amortisation charge for the year.
What about that additional funny? Because I did see there were 2 different figures quoted for the purchase consideration that Liverpool paid. Yeah. One of them was 30.8, one of them was 35. There's a difference there of 4.2. What's that about?
Okay, so they paid an amount of cash up front, which was 30.8 million, and then there was a contingent consideration. So depending on how many times Mo Salah plays for Liverpool and how many goals he scores, Liverpool would have to pay more money over to Roma. And
I think they paid, didn't they? I think he was a success.
Yeah.
He's a success.
Okay, and another point for us to talk there about what's his value now. But that extra amount of, so it's 3.5 million with these contingent considerations. How do they account for that?
Well, when the conditions are met, then Liverpool have to make a further payment. They credit cash and they debit the asset. They can't go back and restate the previous accounts. It's a revision of an estimate.
Okay.
So they capitalise that transaction and then amortise it over the remaining period of the player's contract.
So let's say all these criteria are met after 2 years of the contract. Then at that point, they add 3.5 million onto the value of the intangible asset. And that 3.5 million gets amortised just over the remainder of the contract.
Correct.
We don't go back and restate.
Correct, absolutely. So it's inconsistent really when you think about it for a football club, because the players that they have bought are appearing on their balance sheet as an intangible asset, but the homegrown players are not. There should be proper disclosure in the notes to the accounts about their squad and their squad development. But you talked about value, and Mo Salah clearly has been a success at Liverpool. It's gone up in value, but as an intangible asset under ISA 38, you're not able to revalue that player because there isn't an active market in that player. There may be an active market in footballers, but there's not an active market in that player. So Mo Salah remains a depreciating asset so far as the accounts are concerned.
Okay, so we can't revalue him upwards. What about if Mo Salah breaks his leg and never plays again? What happens then?
Well, let's hope he doesn't break his leg. Let's hope he does continue to play. I think that would be an indicator of impairment. And I think we would look to write that off.
Okay. But as things, so I mean, I feel terrible if this does happen. But if Mo Salah does break his leg, we'll feel pretty guilty. And that would be quite a cruel world, I think, if that did happen.
It would be a very cruel world if he broke his leg and couldn't play again. Thank you for listening.